Okay, we are joined here today by Ross and Will, the co-founders of Diversify, formerly known as ETHFinex, a hybrid decentralized exchange on Ethereum. And we're going to be talking about their upcoming new product, their new system for doing the decentralized exchange on Ethereum. Thank you, Ross and Will, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, and so let's start then with just the backstory so people have a bit of context. So, you guys, some people might know you guys as ETHFinex. So, a lot of us here are trading on Bitfinex, and we remember when ETHFinex came about, it was very much the same UI as I remember, and there was also a token associated with it, Nectar, which had all kinds of incentives. So give us just the history and how you've arrived to the current state of things.
Yeah, so originally I think we started off, both Ross and I were working inside Bitfinex. And originally the idea behind Ethfinex was that I think Bitfinex was very sort of supportive and keen to support Ethereum. And in 2017, that kind of led to the creation of Ethfinex to be really, to start with, a kind of reskinned version of Bitfinex that particularly supported more around Ethereum tokens, and the long-term plan being to create a sort of decentralized exchange potentially on Ethereum for those tokens. And so that was really where things kicked off. And initially, sort of let's say a year and a half in, we'd done some of that. So we'd created Nectar token, which was one of the earliest exchange tokens before sort of Leo and most others that are now out there, and also created Ethereum Trustless, which was a sort of early proof of concept for atomic swap Ethereum tokens. It's kind of the precursor of what Diversify is now, and even more of a precursor to what we're about to launch, which is kind of a sort of steroided up version of that original proof of concept.
So tell us then what the model was for ETHFinex before, to what degree it was a decentralized exchange and not custodial, and briefly what the change has been to the what I've seen you guys are calling Diversify 2.0. Just run us through briefly what it was before and what it is now and why this change was necessary.
So Ethereum itself initially wasn't a decentralized exchange, but it had within it a kind of second product, which was Ethereum Trustless, which was a decentralized exchange. And so that was settling every single trade as a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain, which was pretty expensive. Also meant that we had to have quite high minimum order sizes. Trades take quite a long time. It was never really a product that was suitable for professional traders. So actually, most of the customers of Bitfinex were customers who used it as a centralized exchange in a very similar way to Bitfinex. The main difference being that they had a slightly different fee tier, and they earned these Nectar tokens for trading on Bitfinex. Whereas Diversify 2.0 is really taking what was Ethereum Trustless, so the idea of being able to settle every single trade on the blockchain, but using a new technology. And we partnered with STARKWare, which is this basically an organization in Israel who raised a lot of money for some very cool cryptography. And what it does is generate zero knowledge proofs, where we can batch together thousands of trades into a single proof. And that's the only thing that gets submitted onto the blockchain at the end of the day. And although we're using Ethereum, it's almost a blockchain agnostic protocol. So what that means is that Diversify 2.0, as it will be, which is launching next week, doesn't just allow the kind of nice idea of trading from your own custody and being able to do some trading, but quite slowly, but it actually gives an experience that's very similar to any centralized exchange, but where you hold your funds yourself in various types of self-custodied wallets, and the kind of big step change, and the reason why we are kind of so excited about it and coming here to talk and kind of wanting to promote it more when it launches, is that from most traders' perspectives, actually it will look and feel like you're using any big centralized exchange platform, but instead of having to deposit and withdraw to that exchange, you keep your funds on your ledger or in a multi-sig wallet or wherever you want to keep them.
Right, and the other, I guess, condition is that it's only Ethereum-based assets that would be traded, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, although that's actually one of the nice things about this technology, and it won't be part of it at launch. We will have wrapped Bitcoin and some of those kind of sort of wrapped tokens, but the way that these proofs actually work, and this is one of the things that gets us most excited, and I don't think it'll happen for maybe 6 months, is the fact that you can generate proofs that are inter-blockchain. So, for example, you could make a Bitcoin deposit and generate a proof off-chain in this system that was, and therefore credit users that they can use to trade for Ethereum or Tether or whatever they want. So it's a lot closer to being sort of anything that we did previously or that they're now, although it won't be when we launch.
Okay. I think I have a few more questions about how that works, but we'll get into that when we dive deeper into the details of how the system works. But so just to highlight, before in the what you called ETHFinex trustless, every single trade was getting pushed to the blockchain, and so the difference now in what you're calling Diversify 2.0 is that you're actually batching the trades that are occurring on the markets and using zero knowledge proofs through this other company STARKWare in order to basically make it more efficient on chain. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And it means that we can therefore reduce the fees on trades, because now the cost of settlement is pretty much zero, the same as it is on a centralized exchange. We can increase the kind of rate at which traders can use the API. So you can put together multiple trades within a second and trade via API. So it takes away a lot of the sort of nasty effects of the blockchain that we saw with the old product and with Bitfinex trustless in the a year and a half ago, and kind of turns that from a proof of concept into a real viable alternative to centralized exchanges.
Okay, and so why the rebranding from ETHFinex into this separate thing, Diversify?
So a couple of different reasons, but partly we felt it kind of represented the growth and the direction that we wanted this product to. Always sort of seen as sort of the kind of little sister of Bitfinex, and really this product we see as such a big step change that it's not just kind of a small sort of iterative step, but it is something completely different, and we wanted to represent that. But also the fact that it sort of had ETH in the name ties us very much, obviously, to Ethereum. And while personally I love Ethereum and do think where a lot of growth is still going to be, we have to recognize that Bitcoin itself is always going to be number one, and there are many other blockchains that we want to be able to support on Diversify in the direction we're going. So to change the name when we did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad that you mentioned that it's the ETH part of the name that you were trying to get away from rather than the Finex part. And I think you're definitely right that Bitcoin is number one and will always be number one. You can't replicate what Bitcoin has done. Although so this month we've had a lot of different Ethereum people on. One of them, who you probably know, is Eric, who works with Gnosis and does this ETH Hub project, and he had an interesting take on it where he said, basically Bitcoin has won the proof of work coin race, so to speak. Well, I mean, they were the first and they are the best, but that Ethereum wants to dominate basically proof of stake, and that's going to be coming to fruition here in supposedly later this year when ETH 2.0 launches. And I think that's one way to look at it, is that okay, Ethereum gets proof of stake, but then you're highlighting though that this is going to be chain agnostic, and that's one of the questions also that I had prepared. Excuse me, was that why Ethereum and why not, for example, EOS, Tezos, any number of these other chains that have similar hype about scripting on chain. And do you have any plans to work explicitly with some of these other ones?
So I personally I agree with what Eric said, but I personally also do subscribe to this hypothesis, which a lot of people talk about, and it is somewhat controversial, that DeFi, whether people love it or hate it, is something which is very powerful at sucking new assets into the ecosystem. And Ethereum was obviously the place people chose to come and do ICOs. A lot of bad stuff came out of that, but that meant that a lot of assets are already issued on Ethereum, and it's the most interesting place right now to do a decentralized exchange. And even more now that sort of the various components of DeFi, including sort of MakerDAO and lending and borrowing, are happening on Ethereum, that's sucking in other assets, including wrapped Bitcoin, including Tether, where the majority of volume now happens on Ethereum. So for the foreseeable future, I'm still very I personally still think Ethereum is the place that we want to be and that we want to focus most of our efforts. But equally, not to say that it's ever going to win, exclusively, or that we don't want to directly support,
Okay, and so in the model that you had before and the model you have now, there's sorry, you got
cutting out. Or
yeah, I think you're being cutting out. Yeah, I don't know if it's your headset or it sounds like it might be your headset or your internet connection.
Okay, I'll keep going until it completely goes, and then try and reset the internet or something.
Or well, I don't think it's internet because it's not the kind of robot issue or anything. I think it might just be the headset having like a blink off or something. But yeah, so I couldn't tell if you were finished talking then wanted to move on, or if you had actually been cut out. So yeah, why don't you complete your thought then before I jumped in about Ethereum?
Yeah, I was just saying more or less that we're trying to design everything to be agnostic, so that actually if lots of assets get issued on EOS or Tezos or elsewhere, that we could try and support them also, or even just spin up the same system on another chain. It's difficult to do that, of course, but in some ways, this kind of batching technology makes it much easier to do that than the way that it was being done before. So we're kind of open to all cases.
Okay, fair enough, but hopefully not Tron. At least you have some kind of limit and some self-respect, right? I'm just joking. So in the model you had before and the model you're doing now, there's still a significant centralized component. So you're running servers and managing as I understand it, you're managing the order book and the matching. It's really just the trades that you're then batching and pushing to the chain. So as a result, you do have your team at least has an influence there in that part of the model. So can you let us know what how big is the team currently working on Diversify, and what sort of technology are you using in the centralized part of the exchange in terms of what have you written the matching engine in, and where are the servers located for people that want to hook up bots potentially to the API and get low latency, stuff like that?
So yeah, that's a good question. We've kind of optimized for the moment for two things. One is it is kind of and reliability, so keeping things online at all times and keeping a lot of resiliency for periods of high throughput. And a lot of the sort of original code, for example, of Diversify 2.0 was written while we were ETHFinex inside Bitfinex, and of course is therefore very heavily influenced in its architecture by by Bitfinex, which is, of course, I think kind of everyone agrees the kind of exchange stability to handle high trading volume periods, and so that influence is kind of carried through. But it's changed a lot also since then, and our matching engine. Well, we actually deal with things slightly differently. So we have a kind of order management system that can route orders in several different ways. And one option of which, and kind of actually the main option right now, is to route orders to Bitfinex. So when orders are placed, we can check the order book of Bitfinex and either route there and match an order with an order that's on Bitfinex, or place it onto an existing onto kind of the order book there, or match orders internally, and in the future actually potentially route orders to other exchanges. So what that means is that for users of Diversify, there's already essentially the same liquidity available as there would be on Bitfinex, and in the future potentially also more liquidity than that if we then integrate other exchanges. So what that means is, of course, that even with very small numbers of users on day one, there's already at least equal liquidity to Bitfinex, with a small amount of latency on top, of course, because we're routing the orders in that direction. And the kind of rest of the system is in Node.js, ease of development, given that we want to be moving very fast. This is, of course, a big step change in what we're launching, but the next 6 months are going to be critical for growing it and hopefully becoming one of the sort of major exchanges, rather than just one of the major decentralized exchanges, which is a much smaller target. And our team right now is 14 people, mostly JavaScript developers plus a little bit of C++, and across the board pretty much experience in either previously working in centralized exchanges, including Bitfinex, or in various other companies kind of related to crypto.
So that's interesting. How does that work? The way you are matching on Bitfinex and mirroring the liquidity, how do you actually do that? Because I presume that your system is separate. You have your own server separate from Bitfinex. So what happens when, let's say on Diversify and I match with a trader who's on one of the ETHFinex pairs, or sorry, pardon me, one of the Bitfinex centralized exchange pairs. What happens when I match with him? How are you affecting the funds getting into my custody? And how do you then push that transaction to the chain where my counterparty is actually not trading with a signature and trust and non-custodially?
So essentially, we're then operating a kind of zero cost market maker service where we're holding funds on Bitfinex ourselves and placing funds into these set of smart contracts, so that when that match happens, so a match between a user of Diversify and a user of Bitfinex, we're essentially making the trade on Bitfinex and making the trade with the user on Diversify on chain, so that for that user of Diversify, for them it's completely it's only self-custodial, and they're only trading with another user of Diversify, which is us. So we're kind of acting as the party in the middle there, which allows us then to kind of make sure that liquidity is available.
Okay, so you just have to make sure that you're topping up that market making service so that there isn't any sort of draining of the funds when someone does want to get matched.
Yeah, so exactly. So if there's a huge amount of trading in just one direction, then funds have to be cycled out from Bitfinex back into the smart contracts and round in a loop. So of course, the kind of more the more trading is in the same direction. Is in opposite directions. Is in users are both buying and selling on Diversify rather than just selling, for example. The better in terms of reducing the amount of time that collateral has to move.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, why give me just the general idea behind why users would be interested to engage in this high-speed, self-custodial or non-custodial, whatever you want to call it, the type exchange? What are the main selling points for doing this?
So over the last year, go on, Russ.
I say I could step in here. Well, if your headphones are having issues, I think what's really interesting about the new setup is before sort of next week when we launch the new system, there hasn't been an exchange. Traders haven't had a choice between trading on a centralized exchange or trading on a non-custodial exchange or self-custodial exchange that offers all the same benefits. So I guess the question is, if you could have the same, or close to the same experience as you would get on a large centralized exchange, but without the counterparty risk and without the exchange risk, always keeping in control of your funds, so you can move them in and out of the exchange very quickly. You're not waiting for withdrawals or deposits. Would that be something that interests you? Sort of a rhetorical question as well. We haven't just designed this with pie in the sky, right? We think this is what users would want. We had the Ethereum exchange and we worked closely on that for several years. Know a lot of good traders and funds, and really built this with those guys in mind. So I think the kind of six core tenets are, from day one, there'll be liquidity. So this isn't an exchange that is just spun up out of thin air and we expect people to come and use it. There's already liquidity there on day one, which kind of gets over that initial kind of hump. It's high speed trading, so 9,000 transactions a second is what STARKWare have been able to settle, and that's metered. So that's enough to rival even the bigger exchanges. The trading is also private, which I don't think is something that we've touched on yet. So unlike self-custodial exchanges such as Kyber and Uniswap, every time you do a trade on those, people can see exactly what you're doing. From the moment you deposit the funds into the smart contract on DeversiFi, you can do as much trading as you want, and those trades are completely private. There's no one can interrogate what you're doing. No one can reverse engineer your strategies. There's no rollbacks, which is another important point. There's no broken trades, so it's very much kind of instant finality, cryptographically secured. And then once you withdraw your funds, that's the point where people can see your balances have changed. But for all intents and purposes, the exchange enables private trading, and then also low fees. So centralized exchanges have got the low fees, which enables a wide variety of strategies in terms of arbitrage, etc. And that's something that we'll be able to match as well. So Diversify fees will be in the region of 0 to 20 basis points, so very competitive. So it really is kind of the whole package, which we think should be quite interesting for users.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, it hasn't been much of a problem recently, but exchange hacks used to be a plague on the industry, and traders would have to basically factor in this risk of trading with a centralized exchange that they might get hacked. And that's happened to a lot of people here, from Mt. Gox to Bitfinex itself and so on. And when you are trading non-custodially or self-custodially, then you start to trust that the smart contract's not going to blow up, but at least you, in principle, retain custody, because only you can pull those funds out of the smart contract once you've put them there. So I think that's, for me, the big selling point for these. I still call them hybrid DEXs, where you have the centralized feel which traders need, but you also retain that non-custodial characteristic.
Yeah, definitely. The hybrid exchange makes a lot of sense because the order book is hosted off chain, but the settlement is effectively on chain. And yeah, I completely agree with you. We've all had those moments where you've woken up, checked Twitter, there's rumors and FUD of hacks and security breaches, and it's not just the funds, it's also the privacy element, so your personal data. And the aim of this is to give people choice, so that we're not saying we're better than centralized exchanges or better than decentralized exchanges, but we're giving traders the choice. So now they have a viable alternative, and we want to remove that fear factor, which I think is an important step forward for the industry.
Yeah, and I think it's good to provide traders this choice. And when it comes to trading in general, I've messed around with Uniswap and DYDX as well, which is it's a hybrid DEX, but the UX isn't, I think, something that traders want to deal with, because every time, and we had the DYDX guys on, a couple of weeks ago, and he's a good guy. I think they're doing good things. He was very honest about his concerns on the scaling of the system on Ethereum, but they're pushing trades like you were doing before to the chain without doing any kind of optimistic or ZK rollups, and you have to sign every time you are creating an order and every time you're canceling an order. You have to actually go in and sign it over and over again. And at least when I was playing with the staging site that you guys have for the product that's going to be released next week, I believe, you only had to do one signature at the beginning, and then you were able to manage the orders without the hassle of continuously and constantly having to sign every action. Even though that signing of the actions, it helps, I guess, for them to confirm stuff. But you guys have figured out a way to make the UX such that you don't have to do it for every single action. You can just pre-sign the actions, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the important thing is you've got the choice. So I think when you had a look at the exchange, you were using MetaMask. So you make the initial deposit transactions and you make that initial signing to say, yeah, I want, I'm going to do these trades. And then you don't need to have that extra step of the process, which is great, because if you're trying to trade at speed via the UI, then you don't want that extra step. Time is critical. But then you can also connect via Ledger, and you can also, if you connect via Ledger, you can sign every transaction. So there really is the choice is there. I think in the future it'd be good to be able to switch between the two as well. So you get the option of having the signing or not. I think that would be a good addition to the exchange.
Yeah, and then before we go into the more details of how exactly the model is working and the UX journey that I had gone through, let's give us an idea of what the current state of the art or the current landscape is for these Ethereum layer 2 DEX models. Because there was a time where everyone seemed to be talking about Plasma as the future, and last I've been talking to Ethereum people over the past month, they're talking about optimistic rollups and ZK rollups. Give us an idea of why these older ideas are no longer so sought after, and why everyone's talking about ZK rollups instead.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say these other ideas aren't still sort of being pursued. And actually this year, I think we'll see a whole range of scalable decentralized exchanges launch, to the extent that they really, like, as a exchange class, they really are competing sort of at the top of the tables. But originally, I think Plasma was the one that people talked about a lot, and really that's the precursor to optimistic rollups that are now seen as sort of one of the routes being pursued, including by IDEX, for example. The big sort of differentiator that we see with zero knowledge type settlement is that it's a cryptographic proof at the end of the day. It's not that you have to trust the underlying blockchain. You don't even necessarily need to trust the system itself. There aren't complex rules around game theory, which need to mean that people need to challenge or need to stake things in order to participate and give the security to the exchange. It's all underpinned by the same sorts of cryptography that are used in systems like Zcash or in Bitcoin. So ultimately, you're sort of taking away one of the potential vulnerabilities and one of the layers of complexity. And the reason that we personally really like Stark settlement is that we know once a proof is on chain that those trades are final and that we can continue to operate. Whereas with various other of the options you mentioned, including optimistic rollup and Plasma, there's always a period of time during which that can be challenged, during which, for example, if either we've been malicious or if someone decides to sort of stake various assets and then try and maliciously cause us problems, where we might need to stop trading or we might need to roll back trading. So that was one of the sort of main decision makers. But the other is something I brought up right at the start, which is around cross-chain sort of or chain agnostic proof generation. And that's something where we feel the Stark type settlement has a really big advantage. So I know I mentioned it briefly, but one of the things that you can do here is something called kind of conditional proof, where you can make the proof that you submit to the blockchain conditional upon another transaction happening on actually many different blockchains. But let's take the example of Bitcoin. So what we're effectively doing here is saying that I want a particular trade or transfer to happen in DeversiFi, but only if this specific transaction hash occurs in the Bitcoin blockchain within the next, I don't know, 50 blocks. So what will then happen is that we will sort of send to the user a signed transfer that's conditional upon that Bitcoin transaction happening. And the user can then keep that. And as long as they make that Bitcoin transfer, they will know that in a future proof, a corresponding trade or transfer will happen. And therefore, you can create actually from this all sorts of very complex interactions, not just with Bitcoin, but within Ethereum or within sort of DeFi applications. And that becomes a building block that you can build many different types of systems upon. So those are kind of two of the things that really sort of led us down this route.
Yeah, so, for me, the finality. Oh, sorry, it's what man.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
I'd say for me, the finality point is a big one that we can't underestimate either. If you've got a very complex setup and you're trading across all sorts of exchanges, leverage products and options, having a trade roll back on a physical exchange could be catastrophic. So the thing I personally like about the solution is that once that trade happens, it is final, which is very exciting and means that you're not trusting the exchange, but you can be sure that once you've done that trade, it's done.
Yeah, I think that's especially when you compare to Plasma, where there's a whole mechanism for fraud proofs and challenging and making sure that there's no cheating and this and that. It is a bit, I can see how the finality, basically finality period, is really beneficial. So it's interesting, this cross-chain aspect. Because obviously that's not what the day one product that you're launching is going to be for Diversify 2.0. But so this example you mentioned of Bitcoin, like if I was going to trade Bitcoin for ETH, the flow that you described sounds a bit atomic swappy. So it's not like a centralized feel where you have an order book for ETH versus BTC, because you have to wait for a transfer of Bitcoin in order to initiate a transfer of ETH, as I understand the way you described. So would you be able to do a cross-chain setup that would still retain the centralized characteristics which traders are looking for?
So the thing is that you'd basically use this for deposits and withdrawals to the system. So you would say, for example, that if you send this Bitcoin transaction, we will credit you this number of wrapped Bitcoin, or actually any other asset off chain within this trading system, which you can then use to trade. And equally, when you withdraw, basically we would say that we will debit you these amounts from your USDT balance or your wrapped Bitcoin balance or whatever balance you want within the trading system, as long as this on-chain transfer of Bitcoin happens from us to you. So it's only at the point of deposits and withdrawals that these atomic transactions need to happen, as you're kind of saying, and then the actual trading itself can still happen in the semi or sort of pseudo centralized feel way, just guaranteed by these proofs.
Okay, so you're still relying upon a wrapped system where there's a centralized party which is holding the Bitcoin, and then there's wrapped Bitcoin issued behind that Bitcoin.
Essentially, yes, although you can do it in some nice ways, and one of the ways that we'd like to collateral, where if, for example, that centralized party doesn't ever send you your Bitcoin or various other things, you can claim from a collateral pool. Actually, really, this is very similar to TBTC, which is one of the kind of new ways of representing Bitcoin on Ethereum, and that I know Ross really likes, and I think a lot of people are very excited about. So there are a few different ways that you can then mitigate any centralized risk around that, but it kind of gives you all the tools you need to make it work.
Yeah, I looked into the TBTC. For those who are listening, basically, it's a setup where you don't have single signers that are holding the Bitcoin. It's a series of signers that are selected, and then there's a bonding mechanism where people put ETH behind the BTC. They over collateralize it so that in the event of some kind of collusion between signers, then the bond that they provide is for like a backing the BTC essentially. I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously they've had some hiccups when they tried to launch last week or so, which they'll resolve, and we'll see what happens with that. And then if that works, then this model could be replicated for, I guess, any coin essentially. But then that's not something that you guys would be actively doing. You'd just be essentially allowing the transfer of, or the trading of those Ethereum based tokens which are issued, whether it's WBTC or TBTC. Then you're within that realm of Ethereum where you can then do the ZK rollups to do trading, right?
Exactly, and we've got an initial form of this, like we was talking about something a bit further down the line, 6 months, where we can create these conditional proofs directly on that are dependent on the Bitcoin network. But in the interim, these other tokens, these other wrap tokens, wrap Bitcoin forms, wrap Bitcoin, TBTC, etc. We can directly list those on Diversify, and we've got wrapped Bitcoin listed now. So if you go to the current version of Diversify, which we'll be upgrading next week, you can trade wrap Bitcoin with the full aggregated liquidity of Bitfinex and other sources directly from your private wallet. So we're actually kind of going after the high speed angle. So once these assets are already existing on the Ethereum blockchain, you can just deposit them into our system and trade them, or you can come with Tether and buy those wrap Bitcoin on us directly with very low fees, high speed, privacy, etc. So it gives Ethereum users a way of gaining exposure to Bitcoin in various different ways. And our goal is to support as many of these promising wrap Bitcoin forms as they emerge, as they get more adopted in DeFi and other ways. We want to be the kind of the platform that traders can go to get hold of these, but they can also trade them at high speed like they would Bitcoin on a centralized exchange.
Yeah, perfect. And then, so I guess maybe we should have you guys on when you have these conditional proofs, which I think are interesting. I don't know if I completely understand how exactly it works, but I have an idea. But maybe we'll just discuss that when you're closer to launching, so that we can actually feel it and use it and get a better idea. But so you're still pushing in this model that you guys now have developed. You're still pushing things on chain. So just so that listeners understand, if I'm trading on Diversify and you're pushing these things on chain, do I have to pay for it as a trader, or are you guys covering the on-chain fees?
We cover the on-chain fees. So the deposit and withdrawal transactions the user pays for, and then there's small trading fees while they're trading on the exchange, and then we pay for every proof that's pushed to the Ethereum blockchain in batches. And initially, I think those batches will be every hour, but the goal is to, as the trading activity picks up and the demand for withdrawals and deposits becomes more and more, we'll bring those batch times down. So hopefully, within a few months, those batch times will be very fast, which means that for all intents and purposes, you have a high-speed exchange where you can get your funds in and out of the exchange very, very quickly.
Okay, and so the more frequently that you do start to push these to the chain, the more that you're going to be interacting with the chain. And recently, at least, the chain activity has been pretty bloated, and fees have been a bit high. And when I was talking with the Antonio from DYDX, he was quite upfront about his concerns for how Ethereum in the current state is scaling, and how the model of pushing trades on chain is whether it can really scale in that context, especially if there's a bunch of, whether it's whoever's using the chain, whether it's Ponzi's that are clogging it up, it's clogged, and then you have to pay these really high fees. And how does that impact your business model going forward?
Yeah, I think that's definitely absolutely true, and that's something that we saw strict. I mean, so Ethereum Trustless, the kind of precursor to what is now Diversify, had at its sort of best day maybe $8 million of trading volume, which was very bigger back then for a decentralized exchange. And on an average day, particularly during highly congested periods, the gas fees really sort of rocketed. And that also means that correspondingly, the trading fees always had to be quite high and still have to be quite high on the current version of Diversify. I think that the biggest direct impact is that, yes, actually Ethereum may scale, or in the next year, in the next 2 years, to be able to mean that fees can be much lower. But certainly, I don't think dApps can rely on that, because the demand will also grow for transactions, and the throughput is still going to be likely congested as the sort of availability increases. And so, from our point of view, it's always going to be better to be using a system like what we're using, or optimistic rollup, or any of the other scaling solutions on top of Ethereum, because you still pay a small amount of gas no matter what the congestion is to onboard to the system, but the kind of cost per trade then still becomes very negligible, and that means that fees can be very low for users as well. So irrespective of scaling, and if it happens and when it happens, which I think it will, but as you say, there's some skepticism about when that will actually sort of really start to impact, that will still benefit our users and our system and reduce costs. But more important is going to be the layer 2, and I think increasingly more and more dApps of all types are going to be operating on layer 2, as they should be. So it's kind of a separation of the two, and not relying and just hoping that Ethereum scales, because I think that's a recipe for not a great user experience, and a lot of expensive fees.
Yeah, and I guess this Polkadot's project is supposed to be finally launching soon, and I guess some people have hope for how that might assist certain projects. But we can talk about that in ETH 2.0 a bit later. But first, let's then go through. You mentioned user experience. Let's talk through a user journey for someone that's listening and wants to jump onto Diversify. Let's talk about not the current one that's live, but the one that's in staging, the one that you're going to be launching next week. So if I want to trade with Diversify, first and foremost, it's an Ethereum-based DEX, so I need to have ETH. I need to have ETH in order to pay for the initial transactions. But so let's say I open up Diversify, and I've got ETH either in my Ledger wallet or in MetaMask. So what interactions do I have to do in terms of getting approval to send funds to the smart contract, and just how exactly the onboarding process works?
So you, at the moment, to onboard, interact both with the smart contract and with our API. So you essentially notify us that you want to register, and we give you a signature that you can then submit to the smart contract to register your Ethereum address. And actually, that can be a ledger, it can be a multi-sig wallet, it can be any type of a wallet that you want, and you register that against a trading key, which can either be essentially generated from your own Ethereum private key. So let's say you're using a ledger, it could be generated from the same private key as is on your ledger, or it could be a different one. So one of the things that we actually recommend for people trading via API is that they might choose a completely separate key for their sort of trading API key from the one that they use on Ethereum, so that even if they sort of lost or compromised that, no one could still access their funds. All they could do is trade on their behalf. And then you use that to make a registration call onto the blockchain. You then deposit your Ethereum on the blockchain, and everything beyond that then happens via our API. So we provide a sort of really nice JavaScript client library for that. Also some documentation if you want to trade in other languages. And you can then set up any sort of high-speed trading bot based on our API, which will react to, for example, a WebSocket feed of the order book and place and cancel orders according to that feed. So beyond that point of registration and deposit, everything feels like a centralized exchange. It's only happening via our API. And then when you come to withdraw, it also gets made via, you also sort of request that withdrawal via API. And at the end of the user journey, again, contact the on-chain onto the blockchain on the Ethereum smart contract to withdraw the funds back to the original wallet that you deposited from. And you can only withdraw back to that wallet, which ensures that even if you're sort of anywhere along that journey you were compromised, those funds ultimately can still only go back to, let's say, the multi-signature smart contract wallet that you originally deposited from. So that's the kind of full journey.
Okay, so let's unpack it a bit so that people can digest it a bit better. So they are hooked up with their MetaMask or Ledger, and so they have to do a registration which associates their Ethereum address. So let's just call it their Ethereum address. They are registering through the API, and then you generate a trading key, and this is a key which they have to back up. And which can we say it's sort of like an API key, basically, which allows them to basically trade with the system without having to use their private key?
Yeah, I think we certainly think of it as similar to an API key. And there's different ways it can be generated depending on whether it's in the UI or not. But essentially, yes, it's a separate API key that they can then use during all the trading steps.
So what happens if I generate a trading key, I save it, and then I find out later that I have been hacked and they've taken my trading key, not my private key, because it's on my ledger, but I saved a trading key into a folder which then got compromised. Is there a way that I can basically tell you, because you're centrally managing that registration, are you able to then say, oh, this key is bad, so we'll no longer use it? Or how do I manage this kind of situation?
So we can't directly access or see your key, although we know that the public key part of it is registered to your Ethereum address. But what we can do is, if you request it using your original Ethereum address, we can withdraw all funds that you own out of the system back to you. So if that happened and you knew it was compromised, you could basically notify us via API, and we would just force an exit of all your funds back to your original address.
Okay, so if I wanted to continue trading, would I be able to generate a new trading key, or would I have to do that through a separate Ethereum account?
So at the moment, you would have to generate a separate Ethereum account and register that to a new trading key. In the future, I think it'll be possible to associate multiple trading keys, and this is also useful for example, for multiple trading strategies where you may want to have multiple keys in order to better manage your strategy.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to make sure everyone understands all the different angles. So, on chain, there you have to. I guess you have to sign in order to register. There's no KYC or anything associated with this, right?
There's no KYC at the moment. It's completely open access. A lot of the design is basically made to be as quick and easy for people to onboard and exit their funds, to do arbitrage type operations. So it's completely open and basically just crypto to crypto, obviously, given that there's no KYC.
Okay, so the registration process is where you have to use your wallet to sign something and then push it to you, and then you push a trading key which is generated, associated with the address, and then the user has to back it up. But if they don't back it up, then they can always withdraw the funds anyway. But for all intents and purposes, the order creation and position management stuff would be through the trading key. And once you generate that trading key, you still can't trade until you have actually deposited to the smart contract that you guys have coded, where the funds will be living with the smart contract on chain, right?
That's right, yes.
And so when someone's just starting out, then the on-chain interactions are, you have to approve, because every time you're sending money with a smart contract, as I understand it in this context, you have to first do a step to approve sending some funds. So that's one on-chain action. Then the other on-chain action would be actually sending the funds over. Is that correct?
That's right. So essentially, you say that the kind of deposit smart contract is allowed to transfer your funds on your behalf, and so that's the approval that you make, and then you ask the deposit smart contract to transfer your funds from you to itself.
Okay, so I've signed the registration, I get my trading key, I send the approval transaction to your smart contract, I'm approved, and then I send funds over. Do I need to do multiple approvals for different Ethereum assets, or does one approval for all, whether it's ETH or USDT or wrapped Bitcoin? Can I do an all-encompassing approval step, or do I need to do one for each asset?
Unfortunately, you do need to do one for each asset with the Ethereum sort of ERC20 standard.
Okay, yeah. So that could be further, more on-chain transactions that a user needs to do in order just before they start trading. But once it's done for that account. So then I send some ETH over. That's another on-chain transaction, and then the ETH is in the smart contract. I've got my trading key generated, and so now I'm almost in the clear, right? Because then I've got the funds in the smart contract. I retain custody because in the smart contract code, it's written such that only I can approve different activity with it. So you can't just, if you have written code in the smart contract to run away with the money, then presumably whoever's audited it or whoever has looked through the code, because it's all open source, they would have found this. So you can't do that. So now, once I want to create orders.
Sorry, so just a slight caveat there, which is that actually this is one of the interesting things about this design, and this is the big difference in terms of scalability in what we're doing, is that actually once you deposit, initially that contract knows that it was your address that deposited and that's owned by you. But in the next proof that we submit to the blockchain, we will basically prove that you wanted to transfer by depositing those funds to your sort of off-chain account. And so that proof will essentially wipe the record of who owns, at least the on-chain record of who owns that Ethereum that you deposited. So we're no longer keeping a record of that in the smart contract, which takes up data on the blockchain. And the only record of that is then basically off-chain, so that any trading you're doing therefore can be done very cheaply, and all we do is submit a proof of the intent to trade in those proofs. And it's only when you withdraw at the end that the record on the smart contract then gets updated again to say that you owned those funds.
Okay, and we'll get into that in a second. So in the journey up to this point, there's been a few on-chain transactions just to approve the transfer of, let's say, ETH and the transfer of USDT, and then actually doing the deposits. The actual registration was off-chain because you just signed something and then you're holding that information. And then once I want to actually create an order, is there an on-chain action associated with that, or do I just need to make a signature to, for example, with MetaMask, do I make a signature then which says, okay, now I'm going to do some orders, so let me do orders, or how does that work?
So at this point, you are saying the price and the amounts that you want to trade at, and you're signing that with your trading key, not with MetaMask or whatever your original Ethereum wallet was. So that kind of reduces, or it can mean that depending on which wallet you choose, it reduces the kind of burden to manually sign things. You could even set, for example, certain rules to say that I only want to sign if it's above this amount, otherwise automatically sign on my behalf this kind of trade. So that's a kind of much less, it's a much simpler step, and none of that goes onto the blockchain.
Okay, so it's not an on-chain thing, but I thought when I was testing it out with MetaMask that for the first order, I had to do a signature, and then thereafter, it wasn't bothering me in terms of creating further orders. Is that, did I misunderstand this step, or how did that work?
Yeah, I think you wouldn't have needed to sign anything at this step with MetaMask.
Okay, it might have just been, I might be thinking of the trading key creation part. I'm not sure. But so you're saying you can customize how the trading keys permissions are in terms of whether it requires signatures for certain orders?
Yeah, not via our current UI where it assumes like a certain default, but from, for example, if you're trading via API or via another wallet, then you can customize those.
Okay, so there we are. We're now we got our funds in the smart contract, and I'm able to then happily, in a centralized type UX, I'm able to create orders, cancel them, and it feels just like a centralized exchange because I'm interacting with your central server, which then we'll get to now this part with the zero knowledge proofs. And so you were touching upon it earlier, where I made this deposit to the smart contract, and you've made an association with those funds and my account at the start. So how are you able to engage in for those who aren't familiar with the zero knowledge proofs? How are you able to then give a cryptographic proof of all of my activity while preserving my privacy, so that people aren't able to see all of the trades that you're pushing on chain that they're associated with me? How are you able to give that privacy while not, while still proving everything cryptographically, and so that's my actions and not someone else's?
So to do this, we have a slightly this is an extra step which isn't really easily seen by the user, but essentially when you deposit to an account which we call a vault off chain, and that's actually a temporary vault, and then your funds get transferred to a trading vault, which is purely off chain, and actually it never directly gets seen by anyone on chain. And at the end of your trading, those trading vaults, you basically transfer to a withdrawal vault and then withdraw. So when we submit the on-chain proofs, you have to directly submit the proof of what's held in those temporary vaults, but the trading vaults that you have are kind of kept private. And essentially every order that you sign, which is included in this proof, is cryptographically proved to have been valid in order for the proof to be generated and to be accepted by the smart contract, which is sort of open source and can be audited by anyone, and has been audited by has been audited sort of and open source already. So that allows anyone to see that all the trades that were included were valid and were kind of signed by the user without seeing what the amounts that were involved were, in a very similar sort of sense that you can make get transfers they were between and what the amounts were. So yeah, that's the beauty really of the proof system.
Okay, so you have an off-chain vault. So you cut out a bit there, so I want to make sure everyone has followed along with the explanation. So the funds, if I send 10 ETH, the 10 ETH is living on the smart contract, and the server, you guys centrally have created this concept of a vault where you're sectioning off 10 ETH, and then you have a separate thing called a trading vault, where there then can be activity. So can you just finish off what the connection is there between how you're doing those proofs of the activity that are pushed on chain, and like how can I be doing this trustlessly? Like, how can I see that these proofs are happening if my own account isn't connected with it? How does the zero knowledge aspect kick in there?
So we're not using zero knowledge directly for this. It's more the Stark proof itself. So
Stark, okay.
Each, which is a type of zero knowledge proof, but it's not for privacy itself that we're using it. We're using it in order to basically put through these 10,000 operations, each of which says a user wanted to make a trade for this amount for this price. And that we are then matching it with another user who wanted to do a trade for that price in an opposite direction, and that both were valid and correctly signed by those users, and therefore we can generate this proof, and the smart contract basically gets sent that data of that proof and says, yes, this was valid, i.e. every operation contained within it was correctly signed by the user who's involved in it. So that's the way that, without revealing what the actual sort of trades were, it's possible to know that every single one was valid. Does that make sense, or is that not quite what you're getting at?
No, yeah, I think it is. So you're saying that the validation step happens before the information gets pushed on chain. The information itself is, user A sends has money to do this trade with user B, and then the validation of those signatures occurs off chain, and then you push the information on chain. Is that correct or no?
So in order to generate the proof itself, anyway, you had to have had these valid set of transactions, but the smart contract itself then validates that the proof is valid rather than having anything else included in it. So at both off chain and then when it's submitted on chain, it's checked that it's valid.
Okay, and so let's say that a user, if a user is using your current Diversify, they can see on chain that all the stuff is happening. They can see that things are validated. How would I have peace of mind just seeing the maths and seeing the cryptography that basically verifies that I've been doing this trade and this counterparty has the funds to fill me? And how are you giving users the ability to verify this stuff?
So this would essentially be done via but basically, if you knew your balances, you would check that your balance was included in the Merkle root of every other user's balances, and that was what the current state that was just updated to on the blockchain says. But the ultimate sort of the less detailed way of saying that proof is just to know that if you trust that the open source code for validating those proofs is valid, and obviously, that's quite a big if, because there are very few people who understand this cryptography well enough to really audit this code, although it has been audited. You know that actually it was impossible to even update the state on the blockchain without all the trades being possible. But let's say this root gets updated and you wanted to really double check it, you would then need to generate this Merkle root and check that it matches based on your imbalances. So any user can do that, and actually this happens in the kind of worst case scenario. So let's say Diversify went completely offline and STARKWare went offline, and users wanted to be able to their funds. They would actually need to do this process. So we provided this kind of open source code, which is called the data availability committee, where if we went offline, users would be able to use this to generate all the data that they needed in order to withdraw their funds without us. And they would do that, first of all, by generating a kind of proof of what their balances were, which they would submit to the smart contract. This would kind of be during a process that would kind of freeze the whole system and mean that nothing could happen except that when the timer expires, all their funds get returned to them. So even in the worst case, let's say we tried to submit something malicious, or we just tried to censor someone, ultimately this would just lead to the system shutting down and all users withdrawing their funds as per these proofs.
Okay, great. Because that was actually my next question, which is what everyone always asks when they're interacting with a DEX, whether it's a hybrid DEX or full DEX. That what happens in the worst case. Like the main reason I see that why people want to use these types of systems is that they don't have to trust a custodian of the funds, and that in the worst case, if let's say that you guys become evil, and I'm not saying you guys are evil, but maybe you get mind controlled and turn super evil, then how do users get that peace of mind? And I'm glad you mentioned that about the CK snarks, or like these CK, the cryptography behind it, because I remember when Zuku from Zcash was pushing some stuff. Initially, it was an idea to do ZK snarks on Bitcoin, but the cryptography is like super advanced and super cutting edge, and so there was sort of a reluctance to adopt it within Bitcoin. I thought that back then I thought that still it was cool technology, but you're right. There's very few people that actually understand it. So it starts to make me wonder conceptually how much different is it to interact non-custodially with a super complex but decentralized system, which is non-custodial. If only a few people are able to understand it, that seems like maybe there is some secret bug within the smart contract, which I don't have the mathematical or development chops to be able to spot it myself. So how much different is that conceptually to trusting just a centralized actor to maintain the funds? Because you're trusting centralized actors who have coded the decentralized system, to trusting them in being competent enough to have produced it, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the biggest risks. And actually, with Zcash, for example, we saw that their original shielding zone actually had a bug, and there were so few people who truly kind of could work and understood that cryptography that until they replaced it with Sapling, it did have certain vulnerabilities that no one had noticed, and that will be the case, I think, with a lot of cryptography, and or in fact all cryptography, and that but by design it's often new, and it's often sort of less well tested, just because so few people can review it. In our case, the thing here is that, and well, actually, in most systems in blockchain, the kind of protection comes from the fact that it is open source, and therefore lots of people can review it, and there will be lots of eyes on it, particularly if there's a lot of value in the system. And the more the value goes up, the higher the incentive for people to review and double check before they use it. And so what we would hope, but of course that's kind of in some ways a bit naive, is that most big traders will be willing to at least invest some time, or some of their developers' time, or depending what kind of organization they are into reviewing the code. And over time it becomes more and more tested and more trusted, so that most end users won't need to go and look at that smart contract and that cryptography, which they can understand, and which even we ourselves often sort of think is very in depth, but start to kind of gain confidence in the fact that it's open source, and that it's being used by thousands of people to hold millions of dollars of funds. So over time, it kind of gains security, just as we gain confidence in Bitcoin. The longer that it's holding value without being hacked.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool thing about our industry, is that you don't even really need to create a bug bounty program, because the whole system is a bug bounty program when you're storing crypto assets that are worth so much money within, whether it's DeFi smart contracts or whether it's just the protocol level of a lot of these projects. That's a bug bounty in and of itself, because anyone who can hack into or break into any of these systems to find an exploit, they're going to get rewarded by being able to steal the funds. And it just, yeah, well, I mean, people, I think when they're hearing about DEXs or DeFi, they think about some of the recent exploits. And the thing that's that's interesting to me is that a lot of these decentralized projects, they get audits, but then there's a whole spectrum of exploits that can occur in these systems. You have an outright hackable thing, which I think a lot of these auditors are looking for, just outright hacks that can happen to the systems. But then you have these sort of design exploits, which I would say, for example, MakerDAO, which had these CDP auctions where you could actually bid zero on it. That's not technically, a bug which is leading to exploitation of funds, but in a way it really is in practice, because they designed the auctions to allow for people to bid zero. And from a trader's perspective, that's kind of bonkers to allow that. So that design choice has led to people losing money in the system. So you end up getting the same outcome. Another further along down the spectrum, you would have, for example, this hedgy, I think they're called, the options on chain. They had a typo in the code, which is another type of goofy exploit, right? Which led to people potentially losing their funds, and then they had to pull the money out. And then, of course, shortly after, they had another issue that came up, which basically meant that their pooled liquidity system was essentially flawed, so that the markets were inoperable. So I'm not trying to be overly negative about the system and the idea, the what you guys have put together for your Diversify product. But it's just that we are on the cutting edge of all this stuff, and ZK Snarks and the similar technology, it is super cutting edge, and I think also super cool. So how can you give users a bit more peace of mind that who is this STARKWare? I've actually not heard of them before, and what is the role that they are playing in your system, where you guys as a team have coded this centralized thing, and then you're doing the batched ZK rollup transactions which get pushed to the chain? Where in that flow is STARKWare playing a role?
Yeah, definitely. And I can have a go at answering this. Probably won't be able to do it full justice, but there's a lot of things to unpack here. And I completely agree with you. As someone, I consider myself more on the trading side. I've used a variety of exchanges, and especially with all the recent history of all the DeFi hacks and exploits, I think it's the top question that everyone's asking. Is this safe to use? And it's one of the reasons why we've been extra cautious as we approach mainnet. With STARKWare as well. So a couple of things that give me comfort are, so we've been operating a hybrid exchange, which was Ethereum trustless already for over 12 months now, with no significant issues. So we're not just spinning up something completely fresh as a fresh new team. So we do have a limited amount of experience of operating centralized and hybrid exchanges. So I think our sort of foundations have been battle tested. STARKWare themselves, which is the sort of layer 2 scaling technology that we're employing to able to scale the exchange. They're leaders in their field here. So they are an Israeli company that has raised many millions of dollars. I can't quite remember, but I think it's over $50 million from Sequoia Capital throughout the past 3 years, and other partners such as Consensus, etc. So they really are kind of top of their game in this. And just to prove that point, there was an exploit in the Loopring exchange in the way that they generate these trading keys, which we talked about earlier. And it was STARKWare that actually spotted this bug. Could have hacked the exchange for many millions of dollars, but didn't reported it professionally to the Loopring team, who dealt with it straight away, which I think is a great sign that DeFi is really maturing and people are taking this very seriously. So STARKWare are really top of their game, not just in the technology that they're building, but also cryptography in general. So working with a partner like STARKWare gives us a great deal of comfort. I think I question personally exchanges that are spinning up layer 2 solutions themselves, which haven't been battle tested, because there's so many ways that the technology can go wrong. And actually, I don't think Will mentioned it earlier, but we built our own layer 2 scaling technology whilst we were at Bitfinex, based on state channels, and realized that actually our main expertise is the exchange. We want to run an exchange. We know how to run an exchange with customers, with liquidity, we know what traders want, and actually the technology, we'd rather partner with someone that really knows their stuff so that we're not running this thing too lean. So that's why we've decided to go with STARKWare, and it was a very easy choice for us to make. In terms of the STARKWare technology itself, it has been audited, and the audit is on our new Diversify website, which is up now as well. So yeah, quite a lot of reasons there that give me comfort. Obviously, as Will was saying, this will be battle tested over the next several months as more and more eyes are on it and more is open sourced. But that does give me some degree of comfort.
Okay, so STARKWare, Israeli company, is you said their code has been audited. So you're not their role in it, their layer 2 role is it's not open source what they're doing, or it's closed source and it's been audited, or how does that work?
Lots of it is open source. I'm not sure of the exact parts of it, but yeah, it's all been audited anyway, and you can see on the website. Yeah, so I'm not an expert on that, but Will might be able to shed some more light. But yeah, it has been audited.
Yeah, it's basically the smart contract side, which is what validates the proofs, is open source and can be reviewed by anyone. The proof generation side is closed source, but ultimately, if you can see the kind of validator, you have to that in itself proves that the generation had to be valid to kind of pass through it.
Okay, so when I am depositing ETH, for example, to Diversify in the smart contract, is that a STARKWare smart contract, or is that one that you guys have coded?
So it could be, it would depend on the asset, but in most cases, actually, you'd be depositing straight to a STARKWare contract. The kind of main contract that ends up holding the funds, and once they're kind of swept off chain, is part of the STARKWare system. And it's very simple, that one, in that it just basically allows deposits and withdrawals, but it's linked to this more complex smart contract, which is the one that validates the proofs.
Okay, so there's two. Okay, that now it's starting to come more together. So there's a custodial contract, and then there's a validation contract, and these two smart contracts are working together to apply the zero knowledge proofs. Which some of that is going on closed source, and that's probably how you can do it zero knowledge, maybe in the model.
Well, partly in that, yeah, the actual generation of the proof is off chain, so that information is not sort of shown on the blockchain.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then you're still rolling up all of those to look back to that user journey that we were walking through. So I'm trading, and then there's let's say thousands of other people trading, and you're rolling up all that activity through proofs that are being generated in that off chain through STARKWare, and then it's getting pushed on chain into a transaction with the, I guess you said, using just Merkle root style information that's getting pushed on chain.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So that sort of completes the concept of how this model is working. So then product wise, you guys are doing this in for spot, where you can trade ETH versus Tether, wrapped Bitcoin versus Tether, the 0x token versus Tether. Can you give us an idea of what other sort of spot products you are trading? Are you planning to launch, at least in this new Diversify 2.0? Is it going to be focused more on high quality, quote unquote, where there's a lot of liquidity, or are you going to be doing more like DEX, where it's just anything and everything can be traded as long as it's an Ethereum asset?
Exactly. I think you've touched on the right point there. We're really gearing this whole exchange from the liquidity to the privacy aspect to the instant finality, etc., to professional traders, to serious traders. So I don't think there's a huge amount of demand to add smaller Ethereum tokens. We just want to make sure that we have got incredible liquidity for wrap Bitcoin, Ethereum, some of the larger ERC20 tokens. If there's demand to trade other large Ethereum tokens, then we're happy to add them. But initially, we want to make sure that we've got the major pairs covered.
Cool. Yeah, I think that the fact that you're doing Tether is, I think, all traders, when it comes to stablecoins, they're preferring Tether over the rest. And I was surprised when I talked to the DEX guy. I was like, because they're doing a Bitcoin perpetual synthetically using USD coin, which I mean, some people use it, fair enough, but it does have a one-to-one window with Coinbase and stuff like that. But like, traders don't really want to use USD coin. It's more about Tether and all the Chinese exchanges, especially, and so you just get shitloads more liquidity. So I think it's good that you're. It seems like you're focusing more on Tether because that's what traders actually use. So you're going to do high liquid spot markets. It's going to be a nice centralized feel, finality on all the trades. It's not going to feel like a DEX except for the initial onboarding we discussed, and maybe a small weight to do withdrawal because you're batching the transactions that occur on the exchange. So I think it all sounds good. Is there any plan then to expand out of spot trading into some of the more exciting stuff related to, like, when people think DeFi, and that's basically in your name, they usually think about lending markets and potentially margin trading in spot, and then maybe a lot of traders are interested in derivatives trading. So, give us an idea of what's in the pipeline in this model that you guys have put together.
Oops, sorry, I was on mute there. I think our initial sort of specialty is being this high-speed, trustless, deeply liquid layer for physical assets, and that's really what we want to nail first of all. I don't think there is somewhere that offers that right now. I think that's a valuable product to offer the community. If there is then demand to add other parts on top of that, then happy to look at it. I think from my perspective anyway, more on the trading side, it's bringing some more of those features that you're used to on larger exchanges, like better reporting, more advanced order types, making sure that the exchange and that the UI and the API is running properly and servicing the more serious end of the trader spectrum. We're also planning a lot of integrations with custodians. So I think we've got our first custodian probably going live in a few weeks' time. It's under testing at the moment, so people can actually trade directly from a custodian, trustlessly with deep liquidity on Diversify. So that's very exciting as well. And then margin, I think that's probably something that we'd love to explore. It's something that's definitely in demand, but we want to make sure we nail the core product first of all, get that right, get everything working properly, tuned, and then go from there.
Yeah, okay, because I think that especially when it comes to derivatives, this is just such a humongous market, and I guess there's some concern about, at least from what I've heard, that maybe the ZK rollup approach might not be so easy to apply to derivatives because of how the continuous margining of handling balances needs to be done. But I don't know really enough about it. So maybe once you, or when and if you guys start to expand into that stuff, we could talk about that. Because a lot of people here on Whalepool are big in trading derivatives. It's just more capital efficient. It's more flexible. It's one of the products that a lot of traders these days like to use. So
definitely, and I think we hear the same feedback as well. So we spoke to, I was just looking at my spreadsheet, 106 funds and large traders. So defining large as over $1 million sort of assets under management, and the themes all came down to, I mean, the biggest one was liquidity. They said that they don't use DEXs because there's no liquidity, and then as you go further down the list, capital efficiency pops up as a general concept. So whether that's margining or also just making sure that they can trade multiple assets on the same exchange. So one thing that I'm really kind of excited to do, hopefully a bit further down the line, is potentially you could, for example, have a certain amount of open orders on the exchange, and then when one of those orders is hit, if there's not enough balance in your vault, then the other orders get cancelled, but it allows you to cover more bases. So I think that would be easier to implement, especially with our architecture, than margin as an initial point to get traders who are very conscious about capital efficiency on the exchange. And there's also a couple of other things as well, which are a pain point. So like we were talking about this withdrawal batching earlier, but for some people, being able to instantly move around the ecosphere quickly to capture arbitrage opportunities, especially with limited capital, is very important to them. So one thing we've examined, and I think we'll be pursuing, is having some sort of pool of lended assets which a trader could withdraw against. So instead of having to wait for a batch, they could sign and they could withdraw from this pool of shared liquidity, which other people could contribute to and pay a slightly higher fee and withdraw early. So they're kind of like fast withdrawals.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because basically, if you've done a bunch of activity, and let's say it's right after you've done a withdrawal batch, then you basically have cryptographically proven balance, which I'd be willing to lend to someone who cryptographically can prove that they are gonna have 10 ETH available in an hour. It's just like basically short-term juice to get them liquid, fully collateralized cryptographically, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, I think that covers basically everything with the journey and the model that you guys have put together. I think the points you made, just to sum up, because there was a lot that we went through there, but it's a centralized field. So once you've actually gotten the funds on the exchange, and you have to do a couple of things on chain, but once you're there and you're in the platform, everything is smooth, centralized. You don't have to, you don't have to wait for anything once you create the order. It's just like you're creating an order on Bitfinex in terms of how quickly everything happens. Balances are showing up right away after you've executed. So and then the liquidity, because of this market making service that you guys have put together, you're mirroring liquidity from Bitfinex and potentially other partners down the line. So there's nice and thick books. And you have a full. We didn't talk much about it, but your API, is it nice and full featured, so that if I have my trading key and I want to put it into a bot, like we have a lot of people here trading with bots, and would they be able to just basically use their trading key, which doesn't expose their private key to the wallet, but it does expose, being able to engage in order activity on the exchange? Will they be able to then put this on their server in order to trade with APIs, so it's nice and smooth? They don't have to take any action with all of the activity?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's live now. So if you go to diversify.com and click on API trading at the top, that will take you to our new API portal. And the whole ethos of the portal is that it's a product in its own right. So instead of just a few instructions on how to connect and then we leave you to figure out the rest, there's full kind of tutorials, documentation. There's the various libraries there and direct links to GitHubs where you can get other stuff as well. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for people to connect via API, because we do see people connecting predominantly to our current version of Diversify via API as well. And we want to make this as easy as possible for people to build into their systems and funds and aggregators and everything. So the short answer is, very flexible. The documentation's there, and we'll be improving it and adding to it over the following weeks as we launch.
So WebSocket streams and REST API, right?
REST API, WebSockets, and then I think fixes further down the line. But yeah.
Cool. And so, like I might have mentioned earlier, that this month we've had a lot of Ethereum people on. It's sort of Ethereum month at Whalepool, and we've been asking every guest that comes on what their thoughts are on ETH 2.0. And we talked briefly about it before, but in general, how are you guys planning for it? I mean, you did mention that you're not depending upon the fact that it's going to be scaling on there, and it's very uncertain. But there does come a time where it's supposed to happen. They're supposed to be moving over to the beacon chain, and then you as a project, I guess you need to choose which shard to go on and stuff like this. So in general, how is this going to impact your current model, and how are you guys preparing for it?
So I think there's, a long time probably still before it directly impacts us, because Ethereum 2.0 happens in stages. But the first stage is going to be this summer, and I think the biggest impact it's going to have, and forgive me for being bullish here, is that I think Ethereum will do very well in terms of price and in terms of interest, just given that you'll be able to stake and earn staking rewards on, even in phase 0 with existing Ethereum. It'll reduce supply because it will be locked up, and I think that will naturally have a beneficial effect on the entire ecosystem. And we consider ourselves at the moment, very much tied into the Ethereum ecosystem. So that's part of how I think you'll, in the short term, have an impact. In the longer term, as you said, of course, there'll be lots of sort of more complex issues that we need to deal with about how we actually sort of transition the platform onto a shard and all sorts of things like that. But that will be further down the line. But I think also there'll be lots of interesting trading products. So one of the ones that we're putting a lot of time and energy into designing and thinking about is, for example, Ethereum staking products. So once Ethereum is staked in Ethereum 2.0, you can create synthetic assets based on those, sort of like a perpetual bond or a perpetual future, where you can trade staked Ethereum, and those who sort of wanted to stake them can at the same time generate these assets, which can then be traded, and you can split these into different products. So you could have one asset that represents the interest on staked Ethereum, one asset that represents the kind of long-term asset that can be redeemed once it's unstaked. So there are lots of different ways that I think it'll be really interesting for traders, and that we can create interesting assets to trade on Diversify with 2.0. And I think overall there are sort of a lot of there'll be a lot of exciting things, and I think it will be good for the ecosystem, no matter how, no matter the fact that there might be some teething issues in transitioning over.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, I actually had written, I got interested in this. This is why I got interested in ETH 2.0 to begin with, because I've worked on different chain split markets in the past and worked on different hard fork markets and scenarios. And this is sort of a unique situation arising because it's a transition. So one ETH on the proof of work chain transitions into one ETH on the beacon chain. So it's not an airdrop, it's not a hard fork like Ethereum Classic, where the current chain forked off, or it's not like Bcash where they forked off and created their own token that's separate from the original chain. So it's one of these completely different scenarios. So you can't per se run a chain split market or hard fork market. You can though if you are staking the asset in phase 0, you're able to then, at least I analyzed it more from a centralized context. So if I'm Bitfinex and I'm running a staking service, and Ross gives me 100 ETH to stake, I'll stake that for him, and then he's got a database entry called Beacon ETH, and he may as well be able to trade that, and he'll accrue BETH as me as Bitfinex is receiving basically staking rewards. So you can't withdraw that, obviously, but as long as you're in my walled garden, then you can trade the database entry. And so what you're mentioning is that there's a potential, and also because you can't transfer around the beacon ETH. So you're saying that there might be a world where it's being trustlessly staked, and people would be able to then tokenize this somehow without the risk of, because the problem is that or not the problem, this is part of the system, that you can be punished if you're not staking properly. So it's not basically, it's not requiring zero work in order to stake, because you have to stake properly and stably in order to earn the rewards consistently, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can be punished and you can earn interest. Those are the two sort of major properties of this beacon ETH, which can't be withdrawn or transferred until kind of the second or the phase one of Ethereum 2.0 goes live. So as you're saying, you could have one single asset which encompasses both the risk of slashing and the interest, but you could also separate those out. So you could have two assets generated, one of which is purely the interest and there's no risk of anything else associated with it. And you could sell that to one person and have that tradable separately. And you could have the asset which eventually will unlock when the kind of Ethereum 2.0 goes fully live, which has the risk of slashing, which is tradable separately. And both of those will have different prices. Both of those can have different markets. That, and I think that model, I think, has is potentially more interesting for traders, just because it's much clearer what the value of those assets are and how to price them. And so that could be pretty interesting. And you can do this in a trustless way, although there are still quite a few difficulties to figure out. But one of the design constraints of Ethereum 2.0, and one thing that they were very careful to do, was to make sure that on the beacon chain, it's set up in a way that you can have certain types of, or essentially the types of cryptography that are available there are supposed to be sort of friendly to multi-signature and other types of signatures, which make it easier to do it in a trustless way. Now, there's still going to be some kind of, I don't know, as far as I've seen, no one's actually written a sort of clear paper or design to do that, but it was designed to be possible. So I think we'll definitely see trustless versions of it. Although, of course, yeah, someone like Bitfinex could do it in a centralized way too.
Yeah. So one more point about this, and then we can wrap it up. I've been talking with a bunch of different Ethereum people, and they stay in touch with me because I'm sort of a bit critical, but still curious, and we've had some good discussions back and forth. And one of the points that one of the guys has made to me was that there's the staking is designed so that it's you have to make effort in some way. You have to take risk in some way. So there's no this idea of doing, I think, trustless staking is a bit off to me, because you do need to run a validator, which is having the validator keys, and you need to maintain the server, and you can't do that trustlessly and ensure that you're getting all the staking rewards. You have to trust the server to be up and running and to have fallbacks in case there's downtime. What if there's some kind of magnetic pulse bomb which shuts off all of OVH and AWS, and then in the end you really do have to trust that there's a server validating things consistently on the network and not being punished. Because to your point about there could be you could split out beacon ETH, and then there's going to be staking rewards and staking punishments. I mean, all of the BETH is then going, in my view, is actually heterogeneous. You're going to have some BETH which is being staked by some guys where they get punished sometimes because they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and then you're going to have other BETH which is very well behaved and is getting rewards all the time into perpetuity because it's really well managed. So you can't really just say a BETH is a BETH is a BETH. You have to basically say these BETH are being managed in this way, that BETH is being managed a different way. So the risk profiles are different.
Right. You're absolutely right, and that's, though, a problem that exists in the traditional bond market and has been solved by the traditional bond market. So, let's say you have 10 different companies, they all issue bonds. One of them's EasyJet, one of them's various banks, who knows who, and each of their bonds carries different risks. And similar to slashing, you have to trust that company is going to be able to repay their repay the bondholders at the end of time and pay interest on it, etc., etc. Now, what was created in the traditional world for the bond market is the idea of these. I think they're called sort of CDOs, where you basically put together all of these different bonds, all of which have different risk profiles, and you can then create different grades of bonds. So you can have at the top, your kind of 3A bonds, which have very low risk but also very low sort of payouts. And at the bottom end, you have your junk bonds, and those are the ones that, if any of those bonds start to go insolvent, will sort of lose out first, but they have the highest payouts. And actually, you can create these synthetics on top of these bonds, which have very well-defined risk profiles and very well-defined returns. And actually, the interesting thing, and I think one of the most exciting things we'll see happen on Ethereum staking derivatives, will be that same ecosystem. So yes, you've got the risk that each different staking provider will have a different chance of getting slashed. But once you put them together into these sorts of synthetic collections, each of them could be tradable with a very well-known and very well-defined profile. And that's going to be one of the sort of most exciting assets to trade, I think, because suddenly you'll have you could have, for example, a very high yield one and a very low yield one, and we could be trading both of those on Diversify.
That's a really cool point, and I hadn't actually thought about it that way. So basically, you would have sort of Bitfinex, BETH, you would have OKX, BETH, because OKX is one of the exchanges rather that has already said they're involved in staking on the Topaz testnet, and then you'd have all kinds of other organizations out there that are basically having their way of doing it, and some are going to be higher quality with high staking rewards, some are going to get punished left and right because they're sloppy, and these would essentially represent the different risk profiles for the BETH. And then if you pool them together, you're able to pool the risk and have smoother returns. But that's I think that'll be interesting to see how it develops, and it'll be if this could be done in some sort of trustless way. So obviously there are going to be people that need to run the servers, but then if you could associate those staked coins with an ERC20 in some trustless manner, so that you could only access behind the scenes of that token, you could only access it through the staked address or whatever, then it would be a market that you guys could facilitate on Diversify if that's in an ERC20 type format, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. So basically, you're cautiously optimistic about ETH 2.0, both in terms of the market and whether it's really going to be happening per the timeline, and then you'll basically cross the bridge of selecting a shard and all this other stuff once you get there, phase 1, phase 2 ish.
Yeah, I think we'll have. Yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see how it goes at that second step.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. That was all the questions I had. I don't know if there anyone here in the channel wanted to ask the guys from Diversify anything about their upcoming product, or any other questions on Ethereum or in general what they're up to. Okay, I think we covered a lot of ground. I mean, it's been what?
That was a lot of ground.
Yeah, so I think I think it's pretty solid. Before we close out, do you want to just tell everyone where they can find you and what's going on with the next product launch and anything else? Oh, actually, no. One thing we didn't touch on, sorry, was Nectar, right? So tell us then how this Nectar NEC token plays into Diversify now, because I remember when ETHFinex launched, there was a sort of airdrop, I think, for shareholders. I think I got some chunk, and then to be honest, I just sold it when I got it. So but I was interested in the overall model at the time, as I understand that you guys had a bunch of the trading fees were being used to distribute NEC, or can you tell us then what is this NEC, the Nectar coin? What role is it playing in your current ecosystem?
Yep, you pretty much got it there. So initially, Nectar was one of the first exchange tokens. So there was an airdrop to Bitfinex shareholders, and then the remainder was earned by traders of ETHFinex. And then we reached a point where we spun out Diversify, and that the Nectar model has now changed. So as part of the old Ethereum exchange, 50% of the trading fees that were collected on Ethereum, the centralized exchange version, were pledged to Nectar holders. So they were kind of kept in a trust for Nectar holders with this whole decentralized exchange vision as part of the roadmap. So when we spun out Diversify, we've taken that 17,000 ETH now, which is about $3.5 million, and that's been placed into a DAO. So it's I think it's the biggest DAO now live on the Ethereum mainnet, and Nectar holders can go with their Nectar. They can stake into this Nectar DAO to earn reputation, which is the voting currency of the DAO, and then they can make proposals. They can vote on proposals of what to do with that big pool of ETH. So we've had some cool proposals so far around facilitating liquidity across multiple sources, etc. But so that's one use for Nectar. At the same, sorry, after you go for it.
Yeah, so for people listening, the DAO, you're talking about a decentralized autonomous organization where then the Nectar token you're saying is then becoming a way to engage in governance of all this ETH that you're referring to, and it's still tied into Diversify, and what basically you're not just going to say, oh, let's buy a Lambo and vote to buy a Lambo with the ETH through the Nectar DAO. I presume that it's proposals that are relevant for Diversify.
Oh, in theory, it could be anything. So if you want to go to take your Nectar and make that proposal, we can see what happens. But essentially, it's anything that improves the ecosystem around Nectar. So and offers value to Nectar holders. So it's very early in its initial stages, but the initial proposals have been ways to facilitate Nectar adoption and also Diversify adoption as well. So obviously the two are very linked because we've got our existing community of traders who like what we're doing, and they trust us and they want to see their Nectar develop and that ether pot. But I think this ties in quite well to some of the other utility of Nectar. So we've talked about the DAO staking, which is the governance around this big ether pool. There's a couple of other utilities for Nectar as well. So the model has now changed. So it used to be inflationary, in which you earned Nectar for trading on Ethereum. We've now stopped that, so it's become a deflationary model. So up to 50% of trading revenue from trading fee revenue from Diversify is used to buy back circulating Nectar tokens from the market in weekly auctions. So there's an auction going on right now at nectar.community, www.nectar.community. So every week you can come along with your Nectar tokens, wait for whatever price, which steps up in increments of 4 hours, and sell your Nectar tokens for the pot of ETH. So that's the second utility. And then the third is very much, which will be coming a few weeks after the Diversify launch next week. If you hold a certain amount of Nectar, you get fee discounts on the exchange. So there's three main utility points for Nectar.
Okay, good. So that's because I'm a big fan of exchange tokens in general. Basically, many of the top exchanges have them. Huobi, OKX has OKB, Leo from Bitfinex, of course, FTT from FTX. I'm a big fan of that, and there's a number of the others where their model essentially is, as you say, taking a portion of revenues, dedicating them to buying and burning, which I think is just fantastic because you're, as a token holder, getting a whack at the revenues before even equity holders are. And I'm a Bitfinex shareholder and the Leo token holder, so in a way I'm a bit pissed off because we haven't gotten dividends in years. But then again, there's value that gets driven into the Leo token. And then the other portion you mentioned was the trading fee discounts that you get by actually holding the token. I think that makes exchange tokens in general particularly interesting. And you guys were pretty early on in general trying to work out the token economics behind how to do an exchange token, which so it's good to see that's still around. And then so people who are trading on Diversify, people who are interested in it, then can get a stake in the exchange in a way by acquiring NEC, which is the Nectar token, and basically join the community that you guys have formed around the project.
Exactly, and there's a couple of really cool things that could happen here. So depending on what kind of trader you are and what your angle in the ecosphere is, you might not be interested at all in trading on Diversify, but you really want to see, you might be really into decentralized governance. And as hopefully the Ethereum price goes up, this pool of ETH in the NEC grows in value and potentially, gets used in all various ways that offer returns. So actually, you could end up becoming a manager of a significant pool of ETH to get used in all sorts of various cool ways. Or you might think that this new way of high-speed physical trading, trustless trading, which Diversify is now one of the first exchanges to offer, is the future for a specific subset of traders. And you think that acquiring some Nectar now and getting a share in the exchange is a good way to go. Or it might just be that actually you just want to minimize your trading fees, and holding some Nectar short term means that you can execute your strategies as effectively as possible.
Yeah, I think that's cool, and maybe I'll be able to then get enough influence that my Lambo proposal will actually get approved.
Exactly.
All right, I'm glad I remembered to touch on the Nectar portion, because I think that's that brings everything together in terms of the whole project and what you guys are doing. So then now we can wrap it up, and you could just give us an idea of where listeners can find Diversify, or find both of you guys on social media or wherever, and what they can expect with your new launch for Diversify 2.0.
Definitely. So the system has been working on staging testnet, which is what you had a look at yesterday. It's been working well now for weeks, so very happy with the way that that's gone. And we've just finished the stress testing, which is where we simulate hundreds of thousands of transactions going through the exchange for a period of time. The exchange has performed really well, so we're very happy with that. So we kind of got the green light to go ahead. So at the moment, the guys are spinning up the mainnet version over this weekend and currently, and we're hoping that if that goes well, we should be launching next week. So the new website is up, which is diversify.com, which has got some more information there, and then the new upgraded version of the exchange with the STARKWare settlement layer and all the other good stuff should be going live next week.
Right, and so for those who are listening, I made this mistake before. When you're spelling Diversify, it's DEVERSIFI, not Diversify as in diversification. So make sure you're spelling it correctly. And what about if they want to follow along with you, Ross, or with Will? How can they? Yeah, whether on Twitter or anything like that.
Yep, and we're very active on Twitter and our Diversify Telegram channel as well. So happy to answer any more questions there, I'll be hanging out in here as well. So happy to answer questions kind of whenever.
So what was the Telegram group and the name and the usernames on the Twitter, just so people can find you guys?
So mine is just Ross Mid on Twitter. And then if you go to the Diversify website, you can follow all the links there to the social media platforms and the Telegram channel as well.
Okay, yeah, and we'll put a link in the YouTube description here, but just so everyone knows, DEVERSIFI.com. And then from there, you can just jump to Telegram group and other stuff on the Twitter. So
exactly.
Cool.
And we're really keen to get as much early feedback as possible. So if there's something that you don't like or you want to see or we think should be high priority, really happy to hear, and we can factor that into our roadmap.
Great. Well, thanks a lot to both of you, Ross and Will, for taking the time, almost 2 hours here now, to really dig into all the different aspects of the ZK rollup hybrid DEX on Ethereum you guys have put together. Very interesting vision and nice concrete progress you guys have made in this area. Like you mentioned before, I was able to test it out in the stage environment. Very smooth UX. After you've got your funds in the smart contract and everything, it feels like a centralized exchange. So Anyone who's trading on Ethereum should give it a shot when it's live next week. And we wish you the best on the project going forward. And thanks again for making the time to come on.
It's great. Thank you for having us. And I'm very happy to be capping off your month of Ethereum coverage. Very privileged.
Yeah, that was a super high quality interview. You really know your stuff. So thanks a lot.
Great. So we'll stop the recording here. Thanks a lot.